Now this is the fun part, because I was what they called an artist development rep. So basically my job was to, when the artists came through town, they gave us all the baby bands, the new artists, and our job was to do marketing plans for them. Imagine 1999, 2000, and I'm out with bands like System of a Down and Incubus and, you know, Korn. Well, the Korn was pretty big, but Crazy Town. I was with John Mayer like the day that he signed his deal. Like nobody knew who he was. I mean, all these bands. And as a metal kid like me, I got to become pretty good friends with these guys. Even Adele, like we had the Adele record probably 6 to 8 months before it came out in the States. Nobody cared. We couldn't give it away. It was
So welcome to the Power to Speak podcast, and my guest today is Jason Miller, and I'm so pleased and happy to have you here, Jason. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite. I'm excited to speak to you.
Hey. So Jason, you are the marketing director at Creative X at the moment, but in previous incarnations, you have been head of brand marketing at Microsoft and global head of content and social media for LinkedIn. So huge places to be in charge of marketing for. So which came first, and how did that come about?
So, well, you know, my background starts a little bit earlier on when I was in the music industry. So my first job out of college, I started working at Sony Music as an intern. And this is before the MP3, so this is the golden age of compact discs and controlling you know, all the music and paying $20 for a CD or whatever. So so I did that for 10 years, and I moved all around the country, around the U.S. from St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm from, to Austin, Texas, the live music capital of the world. 14 South by Southwest later, over to San Francisco, where, you know, digital was sort of breaking out of the space, but. You know, I talk about this quite a bit. I was in an industry that was fighting digital instead of embracing it. And they didn't have the answers. They didn't have a model. And it was really depressing. And I ended up in a place where I just, the writing was on the wall. And every 6 months, I get a call that says, your job's been eliminated, but we'd like to move you over here. So long story short, I just finally quit and sort of had to go back and reinvent myself. And, you know, got my foot in the door at a tech startup in San Francisco. And then it was off to the races with you know, hustling and writing and blogging and networking and you know, trying to launch my speaking career and you know, do the work as well. But that sort of transitioned into a job at Marketo, where pre-IPO at Marketo, I was leading content and social there about 2 years. Then LinkedIn called, and it was when the marketing solutions product was just coming out. So I joined the week they launched sponsored updates in the feed. It was the first paid thing at LinkedIn. So it was 2013 maybe? Wow, so long ago. Anyway, but yeah, and then it was off the races. 3 years in San Francisco, two and a half years here in London, then moved over to Microsoft for a couple of years, and then Active Campaign for a crazy ride. And I decided to go back to you know, early stage startups where I didn't have to inherit anything. I could build everything from scratch, and you know, I could build a team, and I think I got one more startup in me. I think this is it.
Well, that just sounds like a whirlwind from starting out to now. I mean, there's lots and lots of stages in there that we need to just go back on and catch up on. So at Sony back in the day, what were you then? What was your kind of job title then?
So now this is the fun part, because I was what they called an artist development rep. So basically my job was to, when the artists came through town, they gave us all the baby bands, the new artists, and our job was to do marketing plans for them. And in many instances, we would take them to radio stations, to record stores. We did, you know, promote them at college radio. We did all kinds of things with these bands. But imagine 1999, 2000, and I'm out with, you know, bands like System of a Down and Incubus and even, you know, Korn. Well, the Korn was pretty big, but Crazy Town. I was with John Mayer like the day that he signed his deal. Like nobody knew who he was. Pete Yorn. I mean, all these bands. And as a metal kid like me, I got to become pretty good friends with these guys. And I was out with Slayer. I said, Kerry King, the guitar player, saved me from getting my butt kicked outside of a venue one night. Like, it was a dream for me, right? And it just got to a point where the MP3 was introduced, and you know, it was all downhill from there up until around, I think it was around with the death of Michael Jackson was sort of the last time that people actually wanted physical products, something to actually hold on to, you know, for the memory of the great Michael Jackson. I remember I was in Amoeba Records in a record store, and they announced it over the intercom.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh my God, this is one of our artists. I was just shocked. Nobody saw that coming. And funny enough, you know, some of the records we worked later were MGMT was a really fun one to work. Even Adele, like we had the Adele record probably 6 to 8 months before it came out in the States, and nobody cared. We couldn't give it away. It wasn't until she did I think it was Saturday Night Live performance, which back then, if you played on Saturday Night Live in the States, that was your ticket. That was your #1 single on radio. That was it. We needed to break, and she smashed it. I get chills thinking about it. She played Chasing Pavements and just hit every single note, and it was off to the races. And that was it. And that broke her. And
absolutely.
You know, it's such a rare moment. But yeah, my job was to basically take the bands out, entertain them in cases, get them to their show or get them to an interview, promote them at record stores and college radio stations. So I loved it. It was so much fun. But the sad reality is, and where it kind of takes a toll, is 9 out of 10 bands, and this still happens today. 9 out of the 10 bands that we would have projects with, would fail. And they would end up owing money to the label and, you know, not having rights to their music. And so there's a bit of a dark side. But, you know, when the engine worked, it was magical, right? Yeah. But when it didn't work, it was a bit depressing. I think it took a toll. But we had a blast. I was in my 20s. I was out with these bands, and I was living the dream. And I
can imagine that must have been amazing. That must have been amazing. Magical. So what were you doing then sort of in high school to get you into Sony? What, you know, was there a route? Did you have a plan?
No, I'm terrible at planning. I'm the sort of person who sees the opportunity in front of you, and I just grab it, trying to make as much out of it as I can. But yeah, I barely it's kind of embarrassing. I'm going to really talk about this. I barely graduated high school. Barely. I went to tech school half the day and then high school the other half the day, so I missed out on all the instructions on how to graduate and all that stuff. I took my SATs to get into uni the night before the deadline, so I got into the only university that would take me. Went out of a very good school. So yeah, I think back at, there was no plan, but you know, I think it's a matter of having a drive and having a sort of a vision, and then having the motivation and the determination and the discipline to actually do that. So again, how did I get here today? I'm astounded that I live in London, that I have kids, that I have a wife who is, you know, who I love to death, and that I work, that I've played a role at LinkedIn and Microsoft and Marketo. It's astonishing to me because I don't think I'm supposed to be here. I really don't. So there was no plan.
Yeah, well, you obviously are supposed to be there. It sounds like nobody else could have done the work that you've done because of maybe what, you know, the way that you started.
I think if you look at me now versus, you know, when I was in high school, I was very reserved. I was a heavy metal kid. I was picked on. I was sort of bullied because I didn't fit in. I tried. That was the interesting thing. This is why I love heavy metal so much, right? I tried to be a jock. It wasn't working. I tried to be like I wasn't smart enough to be sort of a nerd per se, which I guess that we're all nerds. I'm a nerd now, I guess, when it comes to it. But I couldn't figure out where I fit in. And there was this little community of kids that were the heavy metal community where you kind of fell into if you couldn't fit anywhere else. Like, we'll take anybody. We're open and we're open to everybody. Our community of heavy metal kids. If you're angry and you're rebellious, come join us. And that's how I sort of found this, you know, love of very heavy music, because it was represented me at the time, angry, but it also gave me that drive and pumped me up. And but yeah, the heavy metal community, like back then, you know, it was the inclusive place that would take anybody and make you feel at home. And sort of that's been consistent through my life. To this day, I still celebrate, you know, all things heavy metal, because it's been such a part of my life and such a cool story. And everywhere I go, I'll tell you this other thing, every opportunity that I've ever had in terms of, I've gotten speaking gigs, I've gotten job opportunities, I've gotten blog opportunities, guest blog opportunities, everything has come from a conversation around music. And most of the time, it's been a conversation around a very obscure metal band because I had a T-shirt on or something. So it's always been that sort of theme. And I think I wrote a post about this at LinkedIn about that crazy sort of camaraderie around heavy metal. I mean, Brian Clark is a heavy metal fan. There's a million of them. Chris Brogan. I took John Burkhart to see a metal show here, a couple of metal shows. Amber Naslund, she's a big metalhead. Scott Stratton, Robert Rose. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it was that little theme, and that the fact that I fell into that sort of opened up a lot of opportunities. You know.
Yeah. That's, I mean, obviously you're talking names, some of which I know from the You Are the Media Network, which is where I first came across you. But what would you say then to other high school guys that are feeling that they have something to give, but they don't know where to go, and they're not particularly academic, but they have something that they want to share? What advice would you give them?
My advice is, I think it's quite simple. I think you have to start creating something, right? So I think we all have something inside of us that we have to give back to this world. And I think there's, a level of imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? And I think the only way to get past that imposter syndrome, even today, like people, there's some folks I work with at different companies who are like, oh, I don't want to post to LinkedIn because I don't have anything to say. Or like the same thing can go back to, my first time in high school. Is like, take a chance. You got to start somewhere. And I think imposter syndrome is sort of solved when you start to get feedback that's positive and reinforces that behavior. And I think that's the only way forward. But if you don't pull the trigger and try something new, and I'll tell you what, if there was the opportunity, there is now, I think, for people to unleash their creativity through, TikTok, Instagram, Snap, whatever it may be. We didn't have those outlets. We sat around with our friends and we smoked pot. And we played records, and we had fun, and that was our outlet. And we built, we went over to different friends' houses and we shared music, and that was our social network. It was just all, physical.
Yeah.
So I think if I would have had that outlet, who knows what would have happened. But I think it's all about just putting something out there, small steps. Doesn't have to be a lot. But I think once you start to get like, I remember my first blog comment at Marketo when I wrote my first blog post. It was horrible. It was a terrible blog post, but someone enjoyed it and gave me a good comment, said, I really enjoyed reading this. And I was like, that's all I needed to, like, out of my way. Like, I've got more,
Yeah. So do you think you suffer from imposter syndrome now, or is that something that disappeared with that first comment?
No, I think it's always in the back of your mind. I mean, even with Instagram and photography, I'm constantly comparing myself to others. I'm constantly like looking at a picture saying that's not good enough. I could have done better. And every time I look at LinkedIn, I'm so glad they turn the links off or likes off your post, because I wouldn't post something for weeks because I would be afraid I wouldn't beat my own likes on the last post. And it just got ridiculous. So yeah, I think it's massive. And I think this sort of trend of contrarian jerks in marketing and trolls, especially LinkedIn, used to be a safe place because if you comment, like, we know who you are. But now it's like all the gloves are off, and there's still these contrarian marketing jerks who are just who just can't seem to scroll past without being a jerk about something. Yeah. I think is still sort of plaguing lots of that. But again, I think if you have some traction and you have even a small network, the goodness always drowns out the trolls, right? So it's still top of mind for me. There is a level of confidence that I try to stick to, but it's never where I think it should be.
No, I mean, I'd love to come back to LinkedIn and what it was like then when you started and what it's like now. But I just want to pick up, because I don't want to forget it, was when I very first met you in the You Are the Media Zoom room, and you were talking about creativity, which is obviously where I come from. You know, this is the reason that the podcast started, and that you may well have been responsible for that, along with a couple of others, because creativity in the small business world is quite a difficult thing to have as a label. It felt in the beginning when I first started my business that people didn't know where to put me. They thought I was a bit fluffy. You know, I work with people around their talks and their presentations and helping them show up. And I come from an acting background, so I use my acting training. So I use improvisation. I use all of those sort of things, my story and storytelling. But it felt quite difficult to fit in anywhere to any of the networks. So the podcast started from that kind of, you know, I want to talk to people that are in small businesses and working in businesses and trying to use their creativity. And what I picked up from you was the blog that you wrote about creativity and AI. And in that piece that you wrote was the TED Talk with Charles Lim about how improvisation actually shuts down that part of your brain that deals with the inner critic and therefore that kind of imposter syndrome. So how did you come across that, and what does that mean to you? Because I've used that. I tell that to everybody now. I watched that TED Talk. It blew my mind. So now I tell everybody, because obviously improvisation is part of what I do with people. And I think it's so important for everybody, no matter what walk of life, what business you're in. So how did you come across it, and what did it mean to you?
Yeah, so it's the part of the brain, I think it's the lateral prefrontal cortex. I might botch that a little bit. I'm no scientist, but that sort of, it's the part of the brain that sort of self-regulates, that gives you every sort of reason in the world not to do or say something, right? And I think there's a time and place for that. But when you're looking to solve a problem, the best way to do this is to turn this off. And I did quite a bit of speaking around this, and the study that you're talking about was where they found out that when a jazz player is truly in this mode of improv, they're opening this space in their brain for creative thoughts to flow freely, and it only happens when you can turn off that prefrontal cortex, right? And what they found is oftentimes the musician couldn't even remember what they played, but when they hear it back, they're like, "Oh my God, I did that!" And so it was this moment. I get chills thinking about this. And then if you dig a little bit deeper, there are other examples of this happening with some of the best creative minds in the world too. For example, Salvador Dali had this trick called slumber with key, I think it was called, where it's an old trick that he picked up from the Capuchin monks. And the only reason I remember that because they apparently invented cappuccino. But it's an ancient trick where you would hold a key. Well, this is what Salvador Dali used to do, and I think Einstein would do this too, as well as some other great thinkers. But you would hold a key, and you would sit in a chair, and you would put a plate upside down underneath the key. And as you're sort of drifting into sleep, at the moment that you release that key, is this moment where you turn off that prefrontal cortex and you open up your mind to what is arguably and scientifically shown to be the most creative state. Right before you drop into sleep, there's this moment where this magic happens. And they say if you can unlock that and then spring up and you are in this pure creative mode, and this is where some of the biggest and brightest ideas have ever came from. And the idea is when you start to slumber out, you drop that key and the clank on the plate wakes you up. And this is how Salvador Dali would paint some of his most magnificent pieces. This is how Einstein would come up with some theories that would change the world. And so it's how do you unlock that? How do you turn that off and unlock this mode of creativity? And lots of us do it through meditation. Once you can figure that out. But another classic trick is the slumber with key. So there's sort of ways to do that. I mean, for me, it's sort of getting lost in music. It's figuring out how to meditate with an app of sorts. But there's ways to if you're really trying to solve a problem, there are ways to tap into that where you can give it your best go and come up with a truly elegant solution that you may have never thought of, or anyone else. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said in that blog as well, and I think I'd looked at Stuart Brown as well about play and just being playful and being in that play mode, whether that's improvising or whatever it is that you do for play. It's just kind of taking your mind away, which all of these other things do, the meditation and all of that. It's taking your mind away from what what you do day to day, you know, all of the other thoughts that kind of come in, and putting yourself into a place where you can just open up and be free.
Yeah, and there's this sort of you know, another very simple example of this is when you're in the shower. Why do all these thoughts come into these brilliant ideas come to you when in the shower? It's because you're so focused on just your routine that you're sort of letting your guard down and letting your brain these free flow thoughts. So, I mean, it's a very simple, you know, idea, but it's also the same concept of where, you know, when creativity strikes you, you can either make space for it, or it's going to hit you somewhere, and you potentially forget that idea. That's the challenge.
Yeah, and that's, well, yeah, you've got to write it down, haven't you? But as soon as it comes, you've either got to do it or you've got to write it down, because otherwise it just disappears. So,
yeah, and you know, the other piece to that I found really interesting when I was researching this, and I did a talk on this at Content Marketing World in the States right after COVID let up, and was this idea that that creativity sort of needs, you know, no restrictions and no constraints to thrive. And it turns out it's the exact opposite. And I think this is great for small businesses too, because, you know, Active Campaign was a role where I focused on solving challenges and inspiring small businesses. And I think, you know, it's at Marketo, we were always taught brains over budget, right? And how you can sort of unlock that creativity. So what research has shown is that the more constraints you have, the more elegant the solution. And I think there's a big example of this. If you look at sort of Doritos, when they talk about they did the $1 Super Bowl ad, I think it was, right? They spent $1 on a Super Bowl ad, and it turned out to be that all those constraints made this beautiful, fun little story years ago. And then there's the other side of that, like, yeah, an example from music that I love is The Clash. Like, I love The Clash, right? They wrote London Calling, this double live album, under constraints, arguably one of the greatest albums ever created in punk history, right? And they were at war with their record label. They were rehearsing in the guitar player's mother's garage. They were completely broke. I mean, they had all these constraints put on them to sort of pull out, you know, arguably one of the finest moments in music. And it was all because of constraints. Now, you can see that play out, like when a band gets this big studio, this big luxury, all this money, and they tend to be much less creative and less adventurous with their music. So that's kind of how I think about how it applies to anyone, small business, large business, marketers, personal brands, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. You know, when you say to somebody improvise, you know, if I'm in an environment where I'm asking people to improvise and just make it up as they go along, unless you give them a theme, they kind of go, well, that sounds great, but what do I do? So you have to give them a box to play in, otherwise they can't create. It's madness.
I love that the improv story, and you know, I think Tim Washer, he was on the Year of the Media the other day, and, you know, adding improv and comedy together, I think, is something I've always appreciated. I've never been able to sort of to do myself, but I like the idea of running with something and you know, having fun with it. But improv has always been fascinating to me.
Yes, no, we do it every day. I'm doing it right now. So are you. So, you know, people go, I can't do it, but yeah, we do it. We do it. What do you think then in terms of creativity and leadership? Because I have this thing that leaders need to give people they're collaborating with. In order to lead, you kind of have to give people the space to be creative, to kind of give them the permission to create.
So there's a couple ways I think about this. And again, I think, you know, the age-old question is, or the age-old challenge is like, I wasn't born creative, I'm not creative. Like that's bullshit, right? Everyone can learn to be creative. It's something that can be taught. And so I think, you know, based on where I found success with my teams over the years at, you know, LinkedIn or Microsoft or wherever, is sort of finding what they have trapped inside, you know, that they could get out, right? Number one. And then number two, painting the picture of what that could look like as something creative and successful, right? So, and bringing them examples to inspire them to get there. So it sounds a bit fluffy, but if you don't have that leader who's there to paint the picture, to bring you inspiration, and then try to pull that creativity out of you and tell you, yes, you can do this, then it gets lost, right? At LinkedIn, you know, we had a thing called the intelligent risk. that was part of our culture there. And I still take this. I took this to Microsoft. I bring it to everywhere I go. And it's basically the permission to fail, right? Permission to try something new and fail. And the intelligent risk is I'm going to botch the definition, it's been so long, but it's basically the idea of where the risk sort of or being successful outweighs any sort of risk that could ever be of any concern, right? So as part of our team OKRs each month, or BPMs, whatever we call V2 Moms, I would always say, here are the things we need to get done. But I want one intelligent risk for you, and this could be anything you want, right? It could be start a podcast, it could be like start a TikTok channel, start a trend, I don't know, whatever you want to do, and then sort of one personal goal. And I think that's the key to development. I've had good managers, I've had terrible managers, I've had managers who do nothing but drive for performance. But I think it's the ones who take a step back and focus on how can you be more creative, and how can I inspire you to do your best. It gets you past being the fear of turning into that marketer that's miserable, that's celebrating mediocrity, that's pushing things out the door just to get them done, to checking boxes, and that's something I've just never been comfortable.
Yeah. I did some work years and years ago at Microsoft at their headquarters here in Reading, I think they are. I don't know whether, obviously, I assume the Microsoft you were at, the headquarters were in the States.
Paddington. It was we had an office in Paddington. The headquarters, European headquarters, was in Dublin.
Oh, right. Well, obviously, when I went there, it was very playful. I went there with a group of school kids. We were doing a project in Minecraft, and they were really interested in it. Microsoft was very interested in their education side. So we took this group of school kids there, and obviously there were swings. People were having their lunch on swings. There were bean bags. There was the kids loved it, but just to be able to work in a space like that. And also recently I've been up to a company over here called Gymshark. Their headquarters are in Solihull with Ben Francis's company there. And again, they've got gyms, they've got places that people can play. They've got places that people can kind of switch off and create in that way. They kind of give them the permission, and they give them the space to do that. So was Microsoft like that when you were there?
They're I found out very quickly that Microsoft was not a good place for me, because it was too big of a company, and I needed to go back and build something. They didn't need me, right? But there were some good things, some bad things about that, just like any other place. But one thing that stood out to me, and I still have some dear friends there, and no hard feelings. But one thing that really stood out to me was they had all these companies. Every company I've ever been at has always said, "Oh, we celebrate, we give you permission to fail, or we celebrate failure," or whatever. Like it's all bullshit. But Microsoft, they actually walked the walk here, and what they had was this thing. I was talking about this morning, called the Golden Plunger, and it was basically a plunger that they had painted gold and bedazzled with all these rhinestones and whatnot. And whoever had every quarter, whoever had the biggest failure, they would ship this Golden Plunger to them, and they would have to present in front of the whole, like we're talking the whole company, not the whole company, but the whole marketing division. We're talking hundreds of people. They would hold the Golden Plunger, and they would talk about their failure, and they would discuss what they learned from it. And it's the only time I've ever seen someone actually celebrate failure and take the learnings and apply it in a culturally company-wide manner. So I will give them that. But yeah, it wasn't. I need a smaller company.
So tell me how you ended up in marketing then. If you came from music and you were at Sony, and then how did the step into marketing come about?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know if I ever told you about this either, but I was going to school. I was working 2 or 3 jobs, had some challenges with my family, and I was sort of on my own. But I was working 3 jobs. I was going to school 9 hours a week, and I'd been going to uni for, I guess, 5.5 years. And I'm like, I remember going into my, my counselor's office, and I said, "Look, I've been going here for quite some time. What can I do? What can I get out of here?" And she goes, "If you take this course, and this course, we'll give you a degree in marketing." I said, "I'll take it." And so, yeah. And this kind of like relates to today. Like, I'm not saying that uni is not important. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have, I think at the time it was, you needed a piece of paper to get this role, right? Like you couldn't get hired in most marketing jobs without that piece of paper. Now I think I would argue that what I learned there wasn't very helpful. I think, I got everything I learned about marketing was done pretty much at Marketo under, John Miller and Maria Pergolino, the co-founder and the CMO, and my boss. So yeah, I fell into marketing like most of us do. And it was the only discipline of business where you could, be creative and you can have some fun. And so that's always been part of what I do. And I think the telltale sign for me when it's time for me to go is when I stop having fun.
Yeah, that's very wise. Very wise. So do you think marketing in general across the board is creative? Is it creative enough?
No, it's certainly not creative enough. It has to be more creative. I think there's just so many marketers trying to do so many things. And many times they're not being asked to change the way they do things, right? Because they're just kind of on this track of, checking boxes and pushing things out the door. And we ran into this situation in the early days at LinkedIn where, one of the biggest things was people were creating research and just pushing it out the door. And there was no you're telling me the importance of doing this, but where's the follow up and where's the inspiring me that I can do this too part of it. So I got to be honest with you, I think it's gotten better, but I'm really quite disappointed when I scroll through LinkedIn and I see the lack of creative pitches and the lack of creative messaging and the lack of just trying to do less with more and be more relevant and be more empathetic. And, I think there's lots of room for it. I think there's some amazing things happening, but I also think that some of the best, marketing isn't there's some of the best marketing happening. We're not seeing it because the people are doing it so damn busy, being creative and pushing boundaries that they don't post to LinkedIn. Maybe they don't need that,
Yeah. I had a podcast conversation probably about a year ago now, actually, which I'd like to revisit with Jeff Cottrell. Do you know Jeff?
Jeff, why does this sound familiar? It sounds familiar. But
Jeff was the head of marketing for Coca-Cola at one point, and again, he has come from a sort of a love of music background, and Converse. It was Converse he went into, and obviously the budget that they had to do this marketing campaign for Converse's 100th birthday, he took and kind of gave it to the kids that were making music, basically. So he set up studios, or him and the team. It wasn't just him, but they set up studios that the kids could play in. The young bands came in. They were wearing Converse. They were wearing Converse anyway, and so they just took photos. They posted them, and that was the marketing, and it exploded. And I just think that's a better way to go than kind of pushing out those ad campaigns that, as you say, sort of celebrate the mediocrity, really.
Yeah, I love that story. I had not heard that story, but that's fantastic. Every sort of successful thing we did at LinkedIn, and LinkedIn, when I started at LinkedIn, nobody cared about LinkedIn. There was a running joke. It was all about getting a job. No one even knew there was a marketing arm. There was a running joke about the feed. Every Halloween, someone would say, "Oh, you want to see a real graveyard this Halloween? Go look at your LinkedIn feed." I mean, you could post something. You could say, I will solve all the problems in the world if you just like this one post, and you would get nothing. There was nothing. And so we were the underdog. We were against Facebook. We were against Twitter. Even Google Plus was eating our lunch, was killing us, right? And so we had to convince everyone. We had to convince, agencies and marketers that there was a place for marketing and a conversation as the professional, network. And so every idea we tried had to be something completely out of the box, something completely new, something completely, sometimes bonkers. Sometimes, I will tell you this, we made the brand team very uncomfortable because we were pushing boundaries and not everything we created didn't look like it came from LinkedIn specifically. But we had a lot of success once we got some traction and we found these intelligent risks really paid off. But it was all led by creativity. Every successful campaign I've had with my team was inspired by something, either a jazz CD cover or a Liam Gallagher subway poster. But it was always about seeing something out in the wild and bringing that into most of the time like a B2C example and figuring out how we could apply that to a B2B world. And I think that's where we found a lot of success. B2B was very boring, these long buying cycles. and they put up, they sort of held themselves hostage in terms of what they could and couldn't do. And I was like coming from a music background, and like I just didn't give a shit. I'm like, we're just going to try everything. It was we call it the George Costanza approach to marketing. So George Costanza from Seinfeld is a great episode where George is having the worst luck with everything, and he has this epiphany, this idea he says, well, if every inkling of judgment I have is wrong, then the exact opposite must be right. So we did the exact opposite of what every other B2B marketer was doing in a B2B environment, and it started to take off. And I mean, 5.5 years, I left when there was no more. I love the platform. I still have lots of friends there, but it got to a point where anything LinkedIn would do or create was going to be successful because the framework is in place and the people were in place and they were smart and they got it. And there was no more, there was nothing else for me to do there. So I gracefully bowed out, and it's still going. It's the strongest, arguably the best platform out there.
Yeah.
But it was tough to get there. And I think it was all about taking risks. It was about very smart people. And it was all creativity in the early days. Everything was about creativity.
Well, I thank you for that, because I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn now, and I can remember, as you say, pre-lockdown, I didn't do a lot on it, but even back then it felt, it was quite dull-ish. Whereas now it does have that traction, and people are kind of posting, and they're networking, and they're collaborating, and it feels very creative. It feels a lot more creative.
What's interesting, I think you were on the media call with Joe Polizzi.
Yes.
And I remember it was profound what he said, because back in the day, 2012, 2013, I was at Content Marketing World, one of the first ones, and it was in Columbus, Ohio. God, maybe it was the second one. And Joe's up on stage. He says, you got to figure out how to be everywhere. You got to be on every single channel. And then he came back and he said he was wrong on that call. He goes, I was completely wrong. And he goes, you got to focus on one channel and you got to nail it. And he said, my channel right now is Discord, and he's smashing it. And I think, when you look at the opportunity on LinkedIn, I mean, if you can nail it there, why do you need to be anywhere else,
Yeah, brilliant. So the new things that are coming up, I sort of was talking to you earlier about NFTs and this kind of creator coin thing that's taken off, which is kind of goes over my head, but I'm interested in what it is. So tell me a little bit about your creator coin and what NFTs are.
Yeah, so I'm still figuring this out. Like, I'm learning along the way, but I got a little bit of FOMO, and like let me preface this by saying, like, I don't need anything else to do. I don't need another channel to figure out. I don't need another trend to jump on. I'm quite happy where I'm at. But I'm fascinated by this because I want in this always be learning growth mindset, right? The NFT is the non-fungible token, which is a digital sort of asset that is owned by a single person. My definition is not clearly as well as a Schaefer would know, or a Jaffe, or a Fanzo. But, and the creator coin is fascinating because it's a bit of cryptocurrency where it's based around supporting a creator in this economy where the community gets rewarded through cryptocurrency, through creator coins, right? And you can buy services or get awarded NFTs with special access. So it's this whole new way of basically organizing a community and rallying them around something unique, right? So I went to Raleigh probably 6 months ago, after seeing, Ann Handley did her coin, Jay Baer, Mark Schaefer. I love Mark Schaefer. Like, love this guy. I cannot say enough great things about Mark Schaefer. And we've been chatting back and forth. He's helped me kind of get launched. And Brian Fanzo, I think, is just doing killer stuff with the 365 NFT. Anyway, so I went through all the process, went through the onboarding, and now I'm getting ready to launch. So I just felt like my profile should be probably going live next week. But I'm interested because I have all this archive of, 1 million concert photos. And I'm interested to see if I can what happens if I bring in a community around specific collections of photos from over the years on a true one-to-one individual level. Like, you can own a copy of something truly unique of maybe an artist you love or maybe a show you were at, and sort of launch these into collections to appeal to different audiences. And along the way, build this community of photographers, which I think is fragmented across different Facebook groups and Instagram. Like, what happens if you bring this collective photography conversation into the world of crypto, into the world of Raleigh, into the world of NFTs? I don't think anyone's figured it out yet. I'm probably not going to figure it out, but maybe I can have some fun along the way. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around the NFT sort of art world. So, and the photographs that you're talking about, would they be exhibited on a channel? How does that work? I've sort of seen an exhibition in a room, in a venue, but how does it work?
I'm not 100% sure. what I've seen, the real magic is not necessarily. I mean, the art is one thing, but I think the real opportunity is what you're seeing, sort of the marketers like Gary Vaynerchuk do, where they package up exclusive services or exclusive access to different tiers of Gary's time, or Gary's network, or his agency. They package them up into NFTs and they put them out into different marketplaces. I think OpenSea is one of them. So yeah, I'm still figuring this out myself, but I think it's twofold. I think the art world is fascinating because you can have a truly unique piece that only you own, but then also, how do you package up an NFT as a portal, as a sort of access point, and an exclusive access point based on your engagement with the community. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So
it is.
Even if I fail, at least I gave it a try, and I got enough things to keep me busy.
Perhaps we'll revisit this in a year or so's time and see where it is at that point.
I'd say give it 2 to 3 months, and then you'll either see me going, "This is a big mistake," or "Oh, it's cool, it's working." So
you'll be a millionaire. The photography, though, because you are a rock and roll photographer. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that you are somebody who professionally takes photographs of some incredible music and bands. How did that start?
And it's another one of those things where I look back and how the hell did I get here, right? And it was just, again, it's a matter of seeing an opportunity and seeing how far you can grab onto it and seeing how far you can push it, right? And so years ago, I was writing for this little magazine in Dallas, Texas, just because I liked to write. I did it for free. And don't let anybody ever tell you don't write for free or don't work for free. That's bullshit. You have to, if it gets you to a level and opens up access and builds your network, absolutely, right? But my point is, I was writing for this little magazine for free, just because I like to write for them, and I could write music reviews, and they gave me tickets and music. And I remember the publicist from Motley Crue, one of my favorite bands, reached out to me and said, "Would you like to go to the show and review the show in San Francisco?" And I just moved to San Francisco. And I said, "Yeah, I would love to. That's great. We'll leave you a ticket and a photo pass." And I'm like, What's the photo pass? What are you even talking about? She goes, "Oh, you can take pictures of the first 3 songs." So I'm like, oh my God. So I've never picked up a DSLR camera in my life. I went out that night, bought a camera, stayed up for the next 4 or 5 days trying to figure out how to use this thing. And I get to the show, no idea what I'm doing, but I'm standing next to these other professional photographers from Rolling Stone, Spin Magazine, whatever. And I'm like, and they hate me because I'm this blogger who got in there. I'm killing their industry apparently. And no one will give me any tips on what to do. But I screwed up the photo shoot. And in my book that I put out a couple years ago on Kickstarter, I put my first picture, which is just a big flash of light with a couple of heavy metal symbols up. You can't even see. It's awful. But I screwed up and I love that. I screwed up these pictures, this opportunity so bad that I vowed, and I was depressed for a while, I vowed to master the art of low light, fast moving photography. So, 9 years later, 1 million photos later, thousands of bands. Kiss, I photographed Kiss a bunch of times. I photographed Motley Crue several times after that. Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, Flaming Lips. You name it, right? Liam Gallagher a bunch of times, Noel Gallagher. And it's just been that quest of how can I do better? How can I get better? And just trying to keep, my sort of, my creative flow and pushing the boundaries on how good can I get as a photographer. 10 years in, I think I still think I suck at some things, but I'm good at others, right? But so it branches into I got kids, so now I'm into portrait photography. Now I'm into landscape, and I'm into macro photography, experimental photography. I'm running with it, and it was an opportunity that was dropped in front of me by mistake.
Yeah, but is it a side hustle for you?
I wouldn't call it a side hustle because it's more of I love to do it. and I mean, it's just something I love to do. I mean, I would be going to shows anyway. And now I'm just going with a camera in hand and documenting it and bringing something back that I can, celebrate and share with others. So I think a hustle is something that's hard, and it's a means to an end. This is something I love doing, and I would be doing it if I wasn't getting paid. If some of the stuff I do for free, I don't think it's a side hustle. I think it's become who I am.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I meant more of a hobby that you kind of has become part of your business,
Yeah, and I struggle with that because I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to call it a hustle because I love it so much, and I don't want to call it a business because it's more of a creative outlet, right? But yeah, it's certainly become something that takes up a tremendous amount of my time. I'll tell you this: like I will tell you this. If I took all the energy and time and effort that I put into learning photography and shooting shows and editing photos and putting together this book and selling whatever and building my website, if I took all that energy and put it into my career, where would I be today? I would probably be a VP or a CMO somewhere, but I don't care about that, right? I'm at a level where everything I've done has got me to the end result is not to be an influencer. It's not to be a thought leader. It's to give myself control over the choices of how I spend my time and where I work and the work that I do. And I think anybody who goes into this thinking they're going to be an influencer or a thought leader or leading with their personal brand, they're missing the whole point. Like everyone's like, oh, you can't give me advice about being a personal brand if you don't have 10,000 followers on Twitter. Like, it's not the point. It's not about it's about access. It's about feeling good about yourself. It's about having something to say. And I think, I feel like photography has become like, without the photography, I would have missed these opportunities to, infuse these two together and to be a unique marketer. Yeah. So maybe is it a side hustle? Probably.
Well, whatever it is, you're doing it well. I think it's brilliant. And in fact, you've got a photograph in the Natural History Museum.
Funny story about that. When lockdown happened, they canceled all the shows. The last show I got into was Morrissey, funny enough, and it was like right at the peak of like when COVID was hitting, like the night before they closed down London. I get in to shoot Morrissey, and they're like the one time the guy shows up for a gig because he's notorious for canceling, but it was brilliant. Anyway, so for the next 18 months, like there's no music to shoot. And I'm like, that's kind of all I know how to do. So I flipped my lens around and started learning how to do macro photography, just like things that were in the house and things that were in front of me. And I took this picture. It took me a while to get the hang of it. It's incredibly challenging photography, right? You're taking tiny things and blowing them up, 100 times, many times. Anyway, I started taking pictures of this snail in my garden that was in front of this glowing yellow bulb, and I caught the moment perfectly. And it's actually still in the Natural History Museum as a photo exhibit for nature under lockdown or something. So, yeah, you never know what's going to happen. I was doing it for fun, and it kind of ended up in this cool place. And my kids go to the Natural History Museum, and they have a membership there, and they're like, "That's my dad's picture." And
wow.
I mean, like it's one of those things. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. My photo's not supposed to be there. This is all just happening because you see something and you just push.
Exactly. I mean, and I think if there's anything that's come from our conversation, it is just that fact that you need to step out of your comfort zone. Just put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and take those risks.
So I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, you go for it.
Liam Gallagher said it great in an Oasis song. You can have it all, but how much do you want it? And I think that's the question. Like, how long did I stay up hours and hours trying to figure this stuff out, from concert photography to macro photography, like to even building my network or doing a presentation or writing a blog. Like, how much do you want it? Like, it's not a question of work-life balance. You're never going to have that answer. It's a matter of, if you want to do something, how bad do you want it? And what are you willing to sacrifice for it?
Wow. Absolutely. Well, before I let you go, just tell us where we can, is LinkedIn a good place to find you if people want to come and find you and connect with you?
Yes. So LinkedIn, just type in Jason Miller Creative X. I should pop up there. And Instagram, I spend a lot of time on Instagram with my photography stuff. So Jason Miller CA on Instagram. The Creator Coin probably launched next week or the week after. And that's Jason Miller CA as well. And then Twitter, Jason Miller CA. And I have a newsletter at Rock and Roll Cocktail, rockandrollcocktail.com, rockandrollcocktail.com.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, and that's just where I post my musings on. I call it musings from the digital mosh pit. So marketing, photography, little travel, like whatever's on my mind, post it there. But I have a newsletter as well there that you can sign up for to see what's on my mind.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, and I've got lists and lists of stuff to ask you that I probably didn't get through, but thank you. And thank you for being an inspiration around creativity and, you know, putting it out there for us creatives. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been a fun conversation. And I'll see you soon at one of the You're the Media events.
Yes. So. Yeah. I shall see you on a screen very soon.
Awesome. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.